What's the point? Is that a question you've ever asked? What's the point? It's a question that people at both extremes of life ask. People who have massively made it, hugely successful, and people who have nothing. What's the point? Some people achieve a whole lot, and they get loads of money and they get loads of success. And then they find themselves in a place where they realize money and success don't satisfy. And they ask, what's the point? Some people have absolutely nothing, and even what they have gets taken away. And they find themselves in a place where they ask, what's the point of even trying to keep going? What's the point? The reality for most of us in the room is that we're somewhere in between, isn't it? We're somewhere in between hugely successful and having absolutely nothing. And yet it's probably a question most of us in the room have asked at some point. What's the point? What's the purpose of my life? What is the reason that I'm here? Why does anything exist at all? What's the point is a good question to ask too as we open into a new series in a book like Genesis. What is the point of this book? The name of it tells us something about what its contents are going to be. The word Genesis just means beginning, or it means origins. So it is a book that's going to tell us something about the origins of the world. The question, though, remains, what's the point? Why do we need to know about where the world has come from? Why do we need this book? Why has it been written in the first place? Why do we need to know where the universe has come from? Because, let me say this carefully, here's what Genesis isn't. Genesis isn't a science textbook. Genesis is not anti-scientific. Don't hear me say Genesis is one big metaphor. Don't hear me say Genesis is fiction. But what Genesis isn't is a biology class on how plants and animals function. What Genesis isn't is a physics textbook to explain to us the laws of motion or gravity. It's a book not in conflict with science, but science isn't the point. This is why. Science seeks to describe the creation and how it works. Genesis speaks to reveal to us the Creator. That's the point. This book that we're going to be looking at over the next number of weeks is the Creator revealing himself to you and to I. The main subject of the whole book is God. We're going to see just in chapter 1 over the next couple of weeks that God creates, God says, He sees, God divides, God calls, God makes, God sets, God blesses. It is fundamentally about God. Why? Why do we need a book that tells us about the origins of the universe and the Creator God who made it? Well, to understand the importance of Genesis, we need to understand something of the origins of Genesis. Going back to the beginning is generally a good place to go, because in the beginning, God, that's what Genesis 1 verse 1 says, which means there was nobody else there, was there? Nobody else but God. And so Genesis chapter 1 isn't like what we've been doing in the book of Mark since August. We were working through the book of Mark, knowing this is an eyewitness account of Jesus' life and death and resurrection. Genesis chapter 1 is not an eyewitness account because there was nobody there. And so we ought to ask, well then, who can speak with certainty on the origins of the universe if no one was there to see? Because there have been a lot of myths about where the world has come from. There's been an awful lot of people taking a stab at that question. I looked some of them up this week. They're quite entertaining if you want to do that on your Sunday afternoon. The Babylonians, they believed that the world began after a domestic dispute between a god and his goddess wife. And she was some sort of sea dragon goddess, okay? And they had an argument, and then he killed her, and then he split her in half, and one half became the sky and one half became the sea. Okay, that's what the Babylonians posited. The ancient Mayan civilization, their creation story involves a ball game. So, I mean, I'm open to ball games, but it sounds a bit out there, doesn't it? Between two, like, deity figures who end up, I don't know why they're always cutting people in half, chopping someone's head off and then using the head as a ball in the ball game. And then the winner, in celebration of the victory, plants some sweet corn, okay, out of which they create humans. That's the Mayan story. In Hinduism, the world emerges from a golden egg. In Greek mythology, Mother Earth emerged out of chaos and then gave birth to the sky god. In Norse mythology, the world grew out of the body of a dead giant, land from his flesh, and the sea from his blood. Atheists believe everything came into existence by chance, from matter that has always existed, without an explanation of where the matter itself came from. There are lots of ideas about where the world has come from. Lots of people have tried to answer that question. These are just a few. There have been many so-called gods. And there have been many attempts to explain where we come from. And that is the context into which Genesis was written. This was a book written down by one of the leaders of God's people in the Old Testament called Moses. And understanding the context in which it was given will help us understand the point and purpose for which it was given, okay? You with me on that? All right. So if you've got a Bible, we're going to go four books forward, to the book of Genesis. I didn't sleep last night. We're in Genesis. We're going 4 books forward to Deuteronomy. It even says it in its name. It's the 5th book. Okay. We're back in the game. Short story is this. Deuteronomy chapter 30. God's people have been slaves in Egypt. In Egypt, they're surrounded by pagan gods with their own stories of where the world has come from. Now they've been freed from slavery in Egypt. They've been led out of slavery by Moses, and they've been walking around in the wilderness on their way to this land called Canaan that God has promised to give to them to live in. Deuteronomy chapter 30 is on the banks of the river this side of Canaan. They're about to head over. Here's the problem with Canaan. Canaan is also a place full of all kinds of pagan gods and all kinds of pagan stories of where the world has come from. And some of those gods look quite scary. The kind of God you sacrifice your children to. And some of those gods look quite seductive. The kind of God that makes you feel good. And all of them have their own story of where the world has come from, involving gods and goddesses devoid of morals, producing worshippers devoid of morals, trying to manipulate their gods by their rituals and their rites. And Moses' time is up. He's not going to see Canaan. He's about to die. And he knew that the people of Israel, when they crossed over, would be at risk of being too scared or too seduced to root out these idols from Canaan with their false worship, their evil practices, and their claims of divinity. And here's the irony. Having been brought out of Egypt, the danger was they would fall right back into the same practices of paganism they've just escaped. And so Moses writes them a book. He writes down this book. It's the first 5 books in your Bible. It's called the Law of Moses. And he tells them in his book where the world has really come from. in order to confront the pagan worldview that would turn them aside to pagan ways. He wants to remind them who God is. He wants to remind them where the world has come from. And having read it to them, in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 15, he says these words, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, and by keeping his commandments and his statutes and rules, then you shall live and multiply. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land you're entering into to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away, and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you're going over the Jordan to enter. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him, for he is your life." The book of Genesis exists to reveal God to you in such a way that what is set before you is life and death, blessing and curse. It is the good news that there is a God who wants to be known, and who wants to be known by you, and who has revealed himself to you, that he is the God of life. But it's also the warning that apart from him, there is only death. Genesis is not primarily an explanation of creation. It is a revelation of the Creator. It is supposed to inspire in us love and loyalty. It's supposed to produce in us wonder and worship. It's supposed to provide for us the truth that tethers us to the living God when tempted by idolatry all around us. The book of Genesis is the first foundation stone that the whole Christian life is built on. These are the truths around which our whole lives need to be oriented. And that's the point. It is a matter of life and death. Whether you will choose the God who has life and the God who gives life. So in the time that we've got left, that's all I want to do. I want to show to you from Genesis 1, verse 1, the God who has life and the God who gives life. So here's the first one. Choose the God who has life. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God. Genesis 1, verse 1 tells us everything has a beginning except God. Before the mountains were brought forth, this is what it says in Psalm 90, or ever you formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. The God who made the world is a God who has life. So Genesis is not the origin account of God. God is. The God of the Bible is a God who is. The fancy word to describe it is, he's a God who has aseity. Aseity, which means he is from, seity, self. He exists, not dependent on anything else or anyone else, but simply from himself. He is. So his existence, his life, always has been, and it doesn't depend on anything outside of himself. Now, the people of Israel needed to be reminded that their God was not like the pagan gods they were going to encounter in Canaan, not like the ones they'd seen in Egypt either. The God of Israel, the God of the Bible, is not part of a whole kind of pantheon, a whole load of different gods and goddesses. He isn't a part of the creation as if he's just a kind of bigger version of us, a you or me on steroids, having domestic disputes and playing ball games. He's not like that. No, Genesis 1 verse 1 teaches us there is one true and living God who is unique, who is powerful, who is unchanging, who is sovereign, which is to say he is completely over everything that is. He was God before ever the universe existed. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. He doesn't need anything else to be who he is. He doesn't need his creation. He is the eternally existing one who creates and then declares what is good. This is who he is. He's not impersonal, don't misunderstand me, but he is set apart. He is other. And the uniqueness of this living God makes him uniquely worthy of the worship and praise of his creation. His creation, you and I, exist for him. And what you believe about God will be the number one determining factor in how you live your life. If you believe there is no living God, then you will be at the center of your universe. If you believe there is no living God, then truth can become relative to the way that you feel. And morality can be determined simply by what you think. If you believe there is no living God, then the world becomes mechanical, cause and effect. And it becomes meaningless. Doesn't matter. But if there is a God who lives outside of his creation, then he is over his creation, and that means he is over you. If the creation belongs to him, then you belong to him. If he alone has life in himself, then he alone defines what life really is. He defines truth. He defines what is good. He declares to us what is right and what is wrong. And listen, we live in days of deep confusion about these things. We live in days of deep confusion about what we are and why we're here. And Genesis 1 verse 1 gives us the first step out of that confusion into the way back. It says, in the beginning, God. God. If you believe there is a God who has life, then his creation will cause you to wonder. And his uniqueness as the creator will cause you to worship. It was interesting. I don't know if you saw anything about the latest NASA mission to go up and around the moon. And the astronauts, when they came back, one of them was a Christian. But it was interesting listening to the other one, I thought. Christians can be boring sometimes, eh? The other one was interesting. He said, I'm not religious. But we went around the moon and we watched this moment as the sun got eclipsed by the moon. And he said, I don't know how to process it. And as we saw what we saw, the only category that I had to put these things into was thoughts of God came to me. It's interesting. It's interesting that as we look at the wonders of the creation. And it would have been quite cool. I don't think I could have done it, but quite cool to see that, no? Driven to thoughts of, there must be a creator. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies above proclaim his handiwork. Psalm 19, verse 1. The creation reveals there is a creator. Romans chapter 1 says, what we can know about God is plain because God has shown it. His eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So the life of the Creator is clearly seen in the life of his creation. And yet here's what sin does. Sin suppresses truth. And the danger for us today is that if we proudly claim to be wise about the origins of the world in a way that denies the Creator, we find ourselves falling into foolishness and the futile worship of lesser created things. Because here's the point. He is the Creator, and we are creatures, and that means we are inherently wired for worship. It's what we are. It's what we will do. It's what we'll do around a fire in the jungle. It's what we'll do in the stand at Easter Road. It's what we'll do at the feet of our children. It's what we'll do at the end of a needle. It's what we'll do on the altar of our career. We will worship something because you and I have been made. And when we deny the truth that it all starts with the God who has life, then we exchange that truth and we exchange that God for a lie that leads to idolatry and ultimately death. I set before you, Moses says, life and death. Genesis 1 verse 1 is the beating heart of the speaking God who wants to be known and wants to be worshipped. He's not hiding. He is not hiding. And the fact that this Creator God who exists apart from and above his creation wants to be known drove him even to enter his creation in order to be known. So John will pick up these words as he writes his book in the New Testament, speaking about Jesus, and he'll say, in the beginning, this God who has existed from everlasting to everlasting entered his creation by becoming a man in the person of Jesus Christ. And he makes the staggering claim that all things were made through him, and that all things were made for him, and that in him, that's what he says, was life. Life. Now just think for a second with me about the patience on display in a all-powerful, sovereign God whose creation denied and rejected him. Not just scrapping it and starting over, but instead bearing with it, even to the point of entering it, so that he might reveal himself even more fully and even more clearly. It is perfect patience displayed in mercy towards you. And the truth that there is a God who has life, and that God came to live on this earth in pursuit of creatures like you and me who have denied that truth, ought to make us humble, ought to make us thankful, and ought to make us fall on our faces in worship before him. Choose the God who has life. That's the first point. Choose the God who has life. Second, choose the God who gives life. Look at the verse again. In the beginning, God created. Created. The God who has life chose to give life by creating the heavens and the earth. Now, the phrase heaven and earth is the kind of phrase that's just meant to describe everything. So like we say day and night, and we just mean all the time. Heaven and earth means the whole universe, everything seen and unseen. In the beginning was God, and then out of nothing, God created everything. This word that's translated created in this verse is a word that's used sometimes in the Bible, but only ever to describe what God does. So, David Brown might make a cake, or Zara might make some brownies, and Jude might draw a picture today, and I might build a shed. But only God creates. Only God truly creates. Only God takes nothing and makes something. Which means the universe didn't come into being by accident, because there was nothing there to have an accident, you see? There was only God, and God, Genesis 1:1 says, created. And so this world and everything in this world exists because God purposefully brought it into being. And so if you're asking today, what's the point? Then the truth that in the beginning, God, who has life, gave life, teaches you this simple truth. There is a point. There is a point. There is meaning to this world, and there is purpose to your life. You're not a mistake. You've been made. In all of your uniquenesses, with all of your gifts and with all of your talents, with every day and with every breath, the truth that God gives life gives great meaning to your life. You're not an accident. You are a creation. And God willed His creation. He planned His creation. He ordered His creation. He created. It wasn't a surprise to Him. It was a sovereign, deliberate act. Everything began because God willed it to. And this truth is reason, again, to worship Him. Right to the very last book in the Bible. This is reason to worship God. Revelation says, we praise Him for He is worthy, for He created all things. And by His will they exist and were created. It's one of the great themes of the Bible. It's the ultimate point of our lives, to love and praise the God who gave us life. But just in the same way that Moses writes to the Israelites, both to inspire worship and to warn them of the deceitful dangers of idolatry, we need to hear the warning today that apart from God, there is no life. If we think that God's ways are restrictive on us, and that actually our ways is where freedom is really found, then we have forgotten the truth that God is the giver of life. If we come to church on a Sunday and then we don't give a second thought to God Monday through Saturday, then we've forgotten that God is the giver of life. If it's our instinct when we're stressed or when we're overwhelmed or when we're under pressure to turn to distraction or escape or despair, then we have lost sight of the truth that God is the giver of life. If we recoil from urging one another to obedience to God's ways, and we place low value on personal repentance, and we place low value on personal holiness, then we have denied the truth that God is the giver of life. But this is our human problem, isn't it? We are constantly straying from the one place that life is found. It's what we do. Even if we are Christians, we can live like practical atheists so much of the time. We're forgetful. But the good news is that God is not. says in Psalm 103 that he knows our frame. He remembers that we are but dust. We are dependent on him in every way, not least when our sin has led us away from life into death. And it is at that point, here's the good news. It's right there in Genesis 1 verse 1. Here's the good news, that when we turned from that God who has life and gives life, it was at that point, while we were still sinners, deserving of death, that the one who has life came into his creation to lay down his life in order to give to you life. And in his cross, we see both blessing and curse. We see in his cross both life and death. We see in his cross reason to worship and warning to heed. His cross offers to us life, but it comes at the cost of his death. And some of us can remember a spiritual Egypt, if you like. We can think back to the times when we were surrounded by, caught up in, engaging in the world's ways, the world's kind of worship, mixed up in those things that masqueraded as life, but we find them to lead only to death. Some of us can remember those days. Some of us are still in those days and need to hear today that there is a God who redeems, who rescues from that slavery that leads to death, and who offers today life. The truth is, though, all of us have some sort of Canaan ahead. This is the reality. We're going to hit Monday quite soon. And there are going to be all sorts of things offered to you this week. All kinds of things that will draw your eyes off the true God and entice you to turn from his ways and call you to come and worship lesser things, created things, as if there you might find life. And so listen. Hear Moses' words. Choose life, that you might live. Because there is a God who has life, and there is a God who gives life.